There comes a moment when something that has always been quiet becomes clear. When you realize that progress is not measured by what you build or achieve or climb, but by how deeply you've paid attention while you were building, training, or relating. John Winsor has lived many lives: athlete, writer, founder, boss, father, husband, researcher, and mentor. He has shaped both ideas and people across the last couple of decades of change. But what draws me to John is not the breadth of what he has done, it's the quality of how he inhabits the present moment, the now. John brings curiosity and humility. He moves through the world with a beginner's mind that has not been lost to experience, but been refined by it. He is still learning, still listening, and still asking generous questions. In this episode, we talk about what it means to stay open to growth, to uncertainty, and to the people around us. We talk about becoming an elder, not by standing apart, but by standing alongside. We talk about the value of creating space for others to step into, and about building both systems and relationships in a way that makes room for dignity, creativity, and vulnerability. At the heart of our conversation is one simple truth that John returns to again and again, that brilliance is abundant, and how he sees his life's work as creating pathways for this brilliance, perhaps your brilliance, to emerge. This is a conversation about leadership and about stewardship, about continuing to grow with both courage and with care. I'm Steve House, and this is Voice of the Mountains. If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/letsgo. John Winsor, it's so great to have you. Thanks for coming on the Voice of the Mountains podcast.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I get to do this a lot these days, and it's when you called to want to have a conversation, I was like, wow, this is such an honor. I just, I was going through the catalog and listening to some of the other ones, and whether it's, it's Will or Conrad or Rick or Peter or, or any of these other guys, they've all been such deep, good friends for so long. We've done so much together, and it's just an honor to be a part of the crew and honest, obviously, just our long relationship. Just really psyched to have this conversation.
Yeah. And it is, we've talked about this off the record too, but, particularly I think of Peter, I don't know exactly, Peter Metcalf. I don't know exactly Peter's age anymore, but, he's definitely like kind of a generation or generation and a half, maybe two older than I am.
He just had 70th birthday this summer.
Oh, he's 70. Okay. So yeah, a couple generation and a half to 2 generations. And so he is part of this group, and you're a part of this too, who just did and I think it was partially, you guys were all incredible at your sports as climbers and, different skiing and all these different ways. And this whole thing about professional climbing just wasn't a thing. It was just so small back then. And you all had these amazing careers, in professional careers and in different ways. And, we'll get into yours in a second. But let me start off by just sort of what I thought I'd do is there's so many different areas of your life and your experience and your intellect and your professional path that I'd love to dig into. So let me just start by throwing out a bunch of snapshots, and then I want you to tell me what the thread with all of these things are.
Yeah,
so
totally,
here's some
man.
different moments. You've talked about yourself as an intense young kid who would sprint away from other kids, and that gave you the sense of feeling. You talked about growing up in a family that was into publishing, and you worked every job in the newsroom. You wrote the first of what I think is now 6 books, which was
Yep.
titled Fitness on the Road, which is sort of apropos. I didn't actually realize that until I started digging a little bit for interviewing you for this. You you went out to set a FKT with a couple other guys on Kilimanjaro. I mean, this was like 30 years before anyone knew what an FKT was. Like, it was just that wasn't in the lexicon when it was ever that was 87-ish. You bought a magazine called Women's Sports and Fitness, which you turned into a very successful publication and sort of rode that whole and supported that whole wave of women coming into sports through the 80s and 90s in a big way, and allowed them to tell their stories from their first person experience. You were named one of your agencies was named a Global Creative Agency of the Decade. You guys did creative work for brands like Microsoft, Volkswagen, Best Buy, Domino's Pizza. You also were a husband who, and you've spoken very openly and profoundly about this, of a woman who suffered from severe mental illness and took her own life as a result of that struggle. You survived an avalanche. You've at least one that I know of. You were an early board member and a long serving board member for Black Diamond Equipment, and of course we already mentioned Peter Metcalf. He may come up again, but we talked
Yeah.
extensively about the journey of Black Diamond. You're an avid surfer. That guy that has paddled out again after getting worked really hard by a wave. You founded the first crowdsourced ad agency in the world. And through that, you won accounts like the Dish Network, which has an advertising budget of, I think, like $100 million a year, and Harley Davidson, just one of the most iconic brands in the world. And you're also a Harvard researcher, and you launched at Harvard, or helped to launch a laboratory for innovation science at Harvard, and worked with teams at NASA and all kinds of incredible things. You're now a seasoned founder. You've founded and sold a number of companies over your career, and you're really in this phase where I see you, you're just really reaching out and helping young companies, young entrepreneurs embrace the chaos of business, and helping people understand what work is and what work means in the modern era. So what is the thread that connects all of these that's a lot. That's a lot of
Yeah.
different things, a lot of different
Yeah.
experiences, John. And they're so interesting. What's the through line?
Oh man, that's the thing I'm struggling with right now or trying to figure out. I think I've been so blessed, and I think the thing that have has always been the most important to me are relationships, and I kind of came to the climbing world, and even though I was really deeply connected to the outdoors and in my childhood because of my dad and his hunting and our adventures, it's really the people, right? It's whether, it's working with Will Gadd as a young punk, sport climber who was my editor at Rocky Mountain Sports. And, I always want to, be around people that just pushed the envelope for me intellectually and pushed the envelope for me physically, whether it was, again, Will and I, started paragliding together, as kind of the first few lessons with Granger Banks out at North Boulder Park. And so that's been the big driver. I think, the thing I'm working on a seventh book, and I'm really intrigued by this idea that, and I think it's a good way to kind of encapsulate my career, is that, I think that a lot of companies have been very successful because they're operationally excellent when they get big, right? And I think there's a time and place in that for culture. And one of my buddies at Harvard, Mike Tushman, who's kind of the grandfather of organizational innovation, he kind of puts it into two um, categories of exploit somebody who's operationally excellent and can do a great job, and explore, and then trying to create ambidextrous organizations where you can kind of do both. And I would say my career has been very ambidextrous, and the thing that's really pushed me is to be around excellent people that push me. I like kind of the 0 to 1 thing, whether it's even academically being with folks that are kind of rogue. I'm with a bunch of rogue element inside HBS that are really pushing the envelope. And it just makes me laugh because it's very much similar to all the experience I've had in business and trying to do new things, even in the outdoors, right? You kind of, when we went to Kilimanjaro to do that, Kevin Cooney and I did, we would ask all the guides, like, how long does it take? And people were like, well, it's 6 days, even the guys that lived on the mountain every day. And, the idea of trying to do it in 12 hours was just so weird to them. They didn't even understand kind of the mindset difference. So I've been playing with this idea around just this thing, the explorer's mindset, and versus kind of the more, operational mindset. And I think that's in my recent work, that's super important because I think that, and just for context, the work I do now is how organizations will adapt or survive in this age of AI. And I think it's really, really important to think about, sometimes in history, there's a certain kind of organization that really thrives. And for the last few decades, it's been operational excellence, whether it's Walmart or it's, large software companies. But I think we're entering this phase where the explorer's mindset is really critical, right? You can't think about executing on a strategy. I think somehow, what's happened is that strategy back in the day, right? Whether it was Yvon Chouinard or Peter Metcalf, a strategy was just a how, like the vision and the mission and the purpose was like, that was the most important thing, whether it was on a climb or anywhere else. And somehow now with professional managers, it's become the what. And so people are trying to ask like, well, how do I get AI to fit my strategy? And I've been kind of a lone voice in the woods, like hearkening back to a lot of the expeditions and projects I've been involved with out in the outdoors of saying, well, maybe let's think about the purpose and why are we even here? Why do we exist? And then maybe we need a new strategy, a new how to figure out, how we get that done. And so I would say that's kind of the theme of my career is I've just loved being a little bit beyond the horizon and coming back and kind of discovering new things. And I've tried to set myself up in a place that working with a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me, that I can bring these ideas back and then they can help me operationalize. I mean, it can be things like, one of the things you mentioned, my work at Crispin, one of the things I loved is, Bridget and I went to Paris and we rode Vila bikes, which were bike, sharing, their bike sharing program. No place else in the world had that. And, I was super honored that come back to Crispin and work with my partner, Alex Bogusky. And for me to say, hey, let's start a bike sharing program as an ad agency, and he was into it and we did that and it blew up globally. And so those are the kind of examples of, how can I be out on the edge and doing things to kind of feed my soul, but yet come back and be a part of a community and actually operationalize those things, right? Not just make them one-offs and be able to really do some great stuff out of that and change culture.
How much of this is connected to that intense, energetic kid whose energy sometimes felt unwelcome? And spoiler alert, this has come up with basically every guest on this podcast, right? Like this question in some form, because so many of the people that have been on the Voice of the Mountains do come in just sort of wired this way, and they often experience, especially as childhood, feeling like they're outsiders, feeling like they don't fit in, feeling like they're not welcome, they're too much for people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, take me into that in your experience?
Yeah, I always, I don't know. I think it was a lot of it just the way I grew up. I mean, one of the things that I really admired about my dad is, he got kind of stuck in a job in the Midwest, taking over a family newspaper. And yeah, what he really loved is he loved the idea of being outside and being in the mountains. And so that really, that really set a tone for me for my seventh, I guess it was probably like my 12th birthday. We went on an elk hunt in Canada with bows, and I'll never forget, I almost cut my finger off. And, we had to ride a horse out a day and a half to the hospital. And my dad was always up for it, right? That was just the way that I kind of, kind of grew up. And so I think that I had the seeds of this kind of ambidexterity. Dad was very serious in the business world, and I got to observe that. But I also got to see this world where he would go out and lose himself. He'd be gone every fall since 1963, somewhere in Alaska or in Canada. Really, enjoying his time outdoors. And
Hmm.
so, I think there was that, but it was also, I think for a lot of us that have been entrepreneurs and love the mountains, there's this otherness that we feel, but there's also, I think it's a lot of that's not just imposed upon us. I think it's self-generated as well. It's something like, hey, we want to go do something big. Like, we want to kind of bend the arc of history in some way, in our little way. And I don't know what that is in me that wants to do that, but it feels like I almost have an obligation to do something and do it in a different way to show that it can be done in a different way, that things are new. And so that's kind of been a big driver for me, for sure. And I think a theme. So I don't know if I don't know if me as a kid running away was to avoid something. I think it was more the excitement of kind of getting to some place new and describing it and being able to shape it and bring it back and shape culture.
Hmm. So it wasn't necessarily a problem you were running from. It was just a force that was within you and it compelled you forward, like just, and that was enough, like just to go forward and then find a place and have that joy of discovery.
Yeah, I love, I mean, one of my favorite authors is Rilke, and he talks about in some of his stuff in, Letters to a Young Poet about, the awful experience of, being in a room and close to the window because you're terrified of feeling the skeletons in the room. But what more, there's nothing more important than like figuring out what the dragons are and going deep into that. And I've always been really seduced by that. It's like, never really, I probably am not, well, I'm not good at going deep into things for a long time. Instead of asking why, I've always challenged myself to ask why not. Like, that's been a driver through my intellectual work at Harvard and through my work as an entrepreneur and certainly in the mountains, of like, well, why not? Why can't you go do that and link these things together or do it in a new way and change the mindset around something.
Yeah, I think that that idea of, why versus why not is really powerful because I think that there's, you mentioned 0 to 1 earlier. I think that that's where so many of us get stuck. I mean, we overthink it or, or we talk about it with somebody and they tell us we're crazy. So we decide it's crazy. And it just, so many things sort of get stillborn in a sense at that stage of the gestation and they never quite come fully to life.
I totally agree. I totally agree. It's funny because if I reflect on my career, the best motivators were ones when people told me I couldn't do something. Like, one of my friends told me for my first business book and second book, like, oh, you're not smart enough to write a book. Or, when I bought Women's Sports and Fitness and I had a regional title, they were like, you're not, you don't know what you're doing in national publishing. You could never do that. And to me, it was just like, that's great. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to hear that there's no way I'll be able to do that, and just so I can really dig in and figure my own way out. So
I've had that experience as well when with exactly that, where it's just like I don't think I immediately recognized it as being that juicy kernel of motivation I needed, but over time I was like, yeah, that's really like I'm really good. It's somehow motivating me to keep showing up and keep digging in because there is a way. I just have to. Nobody's figured it out yet.
exactly.
There's this fundamental truth, at least I see it as a truth. You can shoot holes in this as you see fit, but that, you know, the harder a problem is to solve, the more value you create.
For sure.
As you work through problems, because it's always it's never just one, it's a series of problems that, every time you hit something hard that feels impossible, I tend to tell myself like, oh, this is really good because this is where 80% of the people who get this far are going to turn around, but I'm not going to turn around. I'm just going to like toiling and I'm going to figure it out eventually. And, uh, and I think that that's like a really, for me, that's been a really powerful framework also in, trying to run a business and solve create value for athletes. And, it's like, well, how do we do this? We've got some stuff that I've been working on for a while in that way, and it's been really hard to do. And I'm like, this is great because it's going to take other people a long time to do it as well, or at least long. So I think that that's really interesting, that motivation. And I used to judge it as sort of dark or
Mhm.
negative, like that kind of motivation, but I've stopped judging it and just let it be now. Have you had any experience with that? Do you?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I had like I'm always in awe of those of us who decide to take, the alternative route. And I was just in Portugal and went out to Nazaré just to see to see the wave, right? And I was in awe of Garrett McNamara. Like what a crazy story of him just going to this fishing village and just, like the wave looks impossible. Looks like this massive, at the time when we were there, it was 30 feet, but it was like this huge closeout. And for him just to work it and work it and work it and work it for years, and just figure it out. And, nobody else was willing to do that. And I love that, right? I love the fact that somebody's just so gritty and determined to figure it out when everybody else and all the other signals are saying, don't do it, or
So tell me more about this story. He discovered this or heard about this big wave and went out and figured out how to surf it. Is that the story?
yeah, no, the story, and then now there's this big documentary on HBO, 100 Foot Wave, and Garrett was a good surfer, but hadn't really proven himself and struggled, and then Laird Hamilton and those guys discovered towing surfing, and Garrett really took it seriously and got really really good at it, and was world champion for a couple times, and then this wonderful story of some fishermen from Nazaré, Portugal, sent him a note because he was all over, everywhere as the best big wave surfer, inviting him. And he didn't even believe it. It took 5 years for him to look at the pictures. And finally, his wife pushed him to say, we should go visit Nazaré. And, the wave, when you're in Nazaré, you're on the beach and it's right there. Like it's just down, you can see it. You can see the point and everything. It's not like it's a hidden place, but it takes like anything, right? It takes like you got to get in the water and you got to experience it and you got to, get terrified and you got to make mistakes. And over a few years, just him hacking together the resources to make it happen has put this whole town on the map. And it's really created an unbelievable economic value for the people of Nazaré. And it's become an epicenter for surfing really, really big waves. And it's just really awesome that somebody had the courage to not go surf Jaws or Mavericks or the tried and true places, but really go off the map and make a really difficult path for themselves to do something. And I love that kind of explorer's vision, the willingness to kind of say, I don't need to take the path that's already been cut for me. I can go take these tools that I've learned in these great places and be able to go do that in a new place.
I think it won't come as a surprise to anyone listening to this that grit is part of being an entrepreneur, part of,
For sure.
bending the arc of history in some small way by our presence here. One of the things that I think they might not be so obvious, but I really resonates with me is the power of empathy. And, you've talked really openly and uh, uh, powerfully, I think. And I've told you this before about your wife Bridget's battle with, she had a
Hmm.
late in life onset bipolar disorder, and she took her own life. And this is really not easy territory to enter. And you've chosen to share it. And I when did it's been, there's been water under the bridge now.
Yeah.
And I know that
8 years.
personally that you've had opportunity to heal a lot of that, but also something like that. And it's always a part of you. You said that that taught you something you couldn't have learned any other way. What, what was that you learned, or what died in you when she died? What was reborn in you through this journey of grief and healing?
Yeah, and those are really wonderful questions. For me, I would say I've always had this weird character, and I think a lot of us that do the things that we do, you know, we we do have a lot of empathy because we've gone through a lot, and a lot of people haven't made it through, and so, it's driven by that. But I think that that idea we talked about a few minutes ago is not excluding an experience, and it's like as tragic as Bridget's journey with mental illness was and her suicide. It was an honor to be there with her, and it was terrifying. Oh my God, I've never been more terrified in my life. Just, the the partner, Bridget and I were married for 32 years, and getting like late onset bipolar was just, she had a 3-year journey through the darkest of times, and none of us knew what was happening. And it took me a long time. I probably will never completely heal from it. It's a scar that happened, but I think it starts with acceptance, right? That we're here for such a limited time, and it's our choice, right? It's our choice on how we live in the world. I think, we're entering that age, you and I'm a little ahead of you. And I'm just sad for a lot of the people that we have known over the years that just seem so desperate to re-grasp what they've accomplished in the past or live back there. And it's just like it's just sad because there's such a beautiful world out here to like explore and touch and push beyond. And so I would say, Bridget tried super hard. It was an honor to be on that journey. I don't see it as any other outcome. There was just, we all
Mm,
tried super hard, and it is what it is. It's like
mm.
it reminds me a lot of being in that avalanche with, that industry trip we were on with Jack Tackle and Kim Miller and all that, when we were all 12 or 14 of us took a 1,000-foot ride. you know it was the same thing. We did everything right. Right. We dug the right pits. We had the right people. We did the right systems, and still you have danger that happens. And,
Or
you
skiing
know,
with super experienced mountain guides that
super
knew
experience.
the area. I mean,
Yeah.
it was Ken,
Yeah.
right? Was one of the
No, it was
guys,
Rich Marshall, Rich and those
Rich Marshall.
guys.
Okay, it was with
Yeah.
Rich.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we did everything right. And yet it still happens. And I was really fascinated even back then of like, I think there were four or five couples on the trip, and three divorced after that. And a lot of the relationships fell apart because of different willingnesses to accept the past. One person in a relationship would be like, "Holy shit, I'm never going outdoors again," or "I'm never going into the backcountry again," and the other person would be like, "Yeah, it happens. It's the way it goes." And it was just unfortunate that there was so much collateral damage from something. And I saw that with Bridget. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, um, took sides in a really ridiculous thing, or blamed me, or blamed, just this weird thing, this kind of cause and effect. I for a while I was really hurt by that, because I tried super hard, but
I can
I think
imagine that would be hurtful.
yeah, yeah, so many friends that I lost. But on the other hand, I'm sad for them, right? I'm sad for them that they are holding on to that and that they can't get over that. And the way I look at it is, hey, we both had the experience of some people's, they're bright lights, and sometimes the brightest, candle burns the shortest. And my God, what a great honor it is to have a journey. I had a journey with Bridget for 32 years, and it was amazing. Since I've remarried Emily, and Emily's equally as amazing. And I think that's the thing that I've just loved is like, holy shit, like how did I do this? Get to marry two amazing women in a lifetime. Like, I am the luckiest guy in the world. And it's very different, right? It's very different experiences. It's challenging in
Yeah.
different ways. And I love that. I think it's the same thing. I got into surfing late in life, and when I sold the publishing company, I went to Mexico, and really decided to start exploring that, and it was so hard. I think a lot of us that grew up in the mountains, no, just you get in the ocean, and I was like, wait a second, I can't control anything. I can't even stand up. Like, what the hell? And yet it's been so gratifying. It's been so gratifying to be able to discover new nuances. I think what's interesting to me is is that beginner's mind, whether it's in relationships or it's in activities. Like there's this freshness that you have when you start something new. And it could be just a new climb in a new area or being, at a new break. But there's a beginner's mind that has to happen that, it's everything's so new and fresh and scary. And that's a really exhilarating thing if you allow yourself to live into that. Right.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to have that with something that you've been doing for your whole life. For me with climbing, for example, like, I mean, I get to experience that a little bit through my kids because just taking them climbing again, and like they're young, and so they're just learning basic things, and it's like, oh yeah, and it kind of brings me back into that. But I still am the person that I am and have the experiences I had, so I can't fully reoccupy that. But I can appreciate that, and that's one of the things that I really like about um, coaching and running uphill athlete is I'm much more in this beginner's position, and it's really, really fun. There's just so much to learn.
Yeah, it must be fun. It must be fun because I so admire what you've done in helping so many people. And everybody has a different approach and a different problem and a different goal. And trying to hack that and figure out exactly what the components are to make them or to help them achieve what they want to achieve must be a really cool thing.
Yeah, every problem is different, right? Like that's it is and it isn't, right? Like there's basic frameworks, basic principles that are universal, but then the individuals, the people are all different, like you said, for all those reasons. You won't be surprised to know that this topic of risk and mortality has come up on this Voice of the Mountains a number of times, given the list of guests. I think and you mentioned this earlier about how different people, particularly after this avalanche, was it in the Selkirks? Is that where you guys were?
Yeah, I was in Selkirks, right? 93.
That different people, and you had these sort of almost A/B tests of these couples that would react very differently. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I've so been through this with both personally and with other people, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Uh, what has changed with your relationship with risk? Because that is very personal, and everyone has, as you pointed out, rightly so, everyone has a different sort of response to these, let's call them near-death experiences, for lack of a better word. And it could be a near death of yourself, or it could be the actual death of someone you're close to. I consider that to have a similar impact, like your best friend or your climbing partner, maybe if they weren't even climbing with you, or maybe they were standing right next to you. But all of these, and then in our lifetimes, I know we've both experienced this multiple times, more times than we care to recount. That's an outlier. Let's set that aside. What was your personal experience with that?
Yeah, I would say, I would say I look at risk very broadly, and risk is a really important thing. Whether it's climbing something that's difficult for me, or riding my bike really fast downhill, or trying a new sport like riding motorcycles or whatever. Um, I've tried to really break down what that feels like, what that means, and what I've found is that you can put yourself in the same situation intellectually and spiritually. I think that as I recount my experience at Harvard, I mean, I'm just a dirtbag climber. Why the hell would Harvard want me to come help them out? And so I feel this, right? Like, how do I be authentic to myself and still like be there? And when I've given up, again, being kind of more grounded and really trying to think about the deeper mechanisms, I fucking love it. It's so awesome to be in a room when you're the dumbest person for sure, and being able to just be really curious and really open to like, it's totally cool. I'm not very smart here. But when you come from a perspective of that and you just kind of really enjoy the challenge and the risk of like, I could sound super stupid to somebody, who I'm trying to gain their trust or, understand a big problem globally. It feels kind of the same as the risks we've taken in the athletic, in our athletic careers. And I just find that's the mechanism that I'm really turned on by. So I might not push myself as hard and have the same risk tolerance physically for a lot of reasons, but I also can transfer that over to be really challenging, or challenge myself from a risk standpoint, intellectually, in relationships and things like that. And I think that brings me as much joy. So one of the things, I don't know if you and I have talked about, but I had prostate cancer this summer, and so I had my prostate removed in July, and I found it so curious, right? I found it so curious. I've kind of really enjoyed the new experiences. I mean, there's so much fear around cancer, and there's so much terrified. People are so terrified. So I didn't tell anybody beforehand, because I was like, I don't want to deal with it intellectually, of like, the burden of like trying to keep people up to speed, and so it's something I'd been dealing with for a year and a half or so. And then once I had been involved, going through it, even through like the incontinence and things like that, it's kind of been like, wow, my body's changing, and it's such a weird thing, and it's super interesting to experience. And one of the things that I've really come back to is, have you ever watched Anderson Cooper's podcast series around, death and grieving? I don't know if you've seen that. Yeah, there's a great interview with Stephen Colbert, and Stephen Colbert had a situation where his dad and I think his brother and sister, or maybe just his brother, when he was 10, died in a plane wreck. And people, his perspective is so beautiful, and it's one that I've tried to adopt. And that is, he said, people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you," and I'm so, there's so much empathy, and people try really hard, and people feel very sorry for you. But as Colbert said in the interview, he's like, I feel sorry for everybody that hasn't had the chance to experience the whole spectrum of emotions of like losing somebody when you're young. Like, what does that mean? And I feel very honored, whether it is like having to go through the difficulty of a partner that struggled and then eventually committed suicide, or having cancer and having that experience. I mean, it just, whether they're positive experiences or they're negative experiences, they're still human experiences, and they add to the overall perspective you have in the world. And I'm really turned on by trying to experience those things and trying to be involved, and not just experience them as a flippant, like I'm going to go do that, but more meditatively of, what does this feel like? How does it feel to do that? I mean, you and I have both written books, and I don't know anything harder than writing a book in my life. It is so hard. And so you have to dedicate yourself so much, and everybody's taking shots at like, this is good, this is bad, all that stuff. But man, I'm so glad I've had those experiences, right? They're awesome when they're over.
Yeah. And then there's this, as climbers, we have this amnesia, and then we do it again a couple years later. So
Right, exactly.
I think that's such an incredible. I just want to touch back on, what you were saying a moment ago, because so many incredible insights and such beautiful insights, and so much to learn there and unpack. I think that for me, the key thing that you said in all of this was that to be almost meditative in your openness to the experiences, and deeply try to feel what it feels like, what that human experience that you're going through is. And because I think that so many of us are armored up, probably from childhood or whatever, and we've walled off emotions, and because they're bad, we've labeled them as bad, so we don't go in that area. That's like a closed door, and we don't go through it.
Yeah.
And so, and I tried so hard, like we were just talking about mortality, and I tried so hard to do that with the friends I lost in the mountains early on. And it was so hard for me it was so crushing, really. Like, it felt soul crushing to lose some of these friends. And it was like, wasn't my brother or my sister or my father like what Stephen Colbert experienced, but these were like really good friends that were just, gone, ripped away.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried so, like, those experiences, I think what they teach is that there's no way, it's so intense, there's no way to wall it off, right? You can't not feel it. You can't not experience it. You don't have to have this meditative approach to it because it's so intense. It just like comes right through whatever armor you put up. It's just like, it's coming through, it's coming at you, it's hitting you, and there's no hiding. And I had to do that a few times, where I went through this, like trying to keep it out, not being able to, and then like feeling like I had to give up. You know what I mean? Like I had to surrender.
Yeah.
And then after I did that, it was like, oh, I actually didn't get worse. It
Yeah.
actually somehow gets better, which
Yeah.
is strange. And it was just sort of the opposite of what I expected. Of course, it took kind of years for all of this to unfold. And I hear a similar experience in yours, and like how you're open to all these, I mean, who wants to have prostate cancer and go through incontinence? I mean, what, or have their wife
I
commit
love my
suicide. I mean,
depends. I love my depends.
yeah, I mean, these are some of the, like, if you had told me any of these things, I don't know, even 10 years ago, I'd have just been like, I wouldn't have been able to handle having a conversation with you about that. Like,
Hmm.
I would have been so impacted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's so interesting how vital that mindset is to working through hard things, solving problems, and I think building empathy. And I think one of the things with marketers that has always been fascinating to me, and I learned this in my time at Patagonia when I started to work with the marketing department, and I started to come for the first time in my life there, I came into contact with people who had like this empathy superpower that
Mm-hmm.
was just like, to me, as a person who had been walling off things and other people's emotions, my own emotions, and to be around people who could just like completely read every emotion in the room, like in a heartbeat. I was like, what? Like, what? Where are you getting this information? And then just slowly starting to learn. And then, of course, they're using it also for commercial purposes, which is, I think, one of the things that makes a really good marketer, right? Is someone who is empathetic and can understand how uh, words or images or moving images can make people feel, right? Like that's what you have to be able to understand as a good marketer. And I think that comes from having to learn about these experiences, like what Stephen Colbert said, what you said. I mean, I think that a lot of those things kind of come together for me right now as you're talking about that. It's really, so thank you for that. That's amazing.
Yeah, man. Yeah. As you talk, one of the things I reflect on is like, I think like and like all of us that have done big things, we know the importance of preparation and we take it very seriously and we're really thoughtful about it. And so I had this experience a couple of years ago when I did my first psychedelic journey. The guy who is going to guide me on this this journey was like, I want you to prepare a shrine with everything that's important for you in your life. And so, like you would do, or most of my friends, that have had similar journeys, we take it really seriously, right? We write down lists and we look at items and we create, like it's like weeks worth of work, right? To figure out exactly how I structure this shrine with all the important events in my life and all the important, people. And, some of it's very egotistical because they're our accomplishments, quote unquote. And some are these deep wounds that we've had because of our relationships. And so I did this, right? I spent all this time and I put it up, and partway through the journey, the guy was like, look at your shrine. What do you think? And I literally just busted out laughing. And the conclusion I came with when I had the 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 help of the psychedelics was that it doesn't matter. Like it's awesome. It's such an honor to do that. But the only reality that we have in life is this moment right here. The conversation you and I are having right now, it is the only reality that we live in. And so if you can do that, if you can say, man, I am so lucky to have all these different things that have added to my ability to perceive what's happening and add maybe something constructive to the moment that I'm living in now, that's awesome. But that's what it is, right? It's just this kind of really beautiful tapestry that we've had the opportunity to weave and be a part of, that gives us the ability to show up in a new way right now, right here. And that's what I really love, right? That's what I crave, those experiences, these conversations, not for honoring or storytelling about the incredible experiences we've had, but more like, how does that influence our conversation? What does it mean? What can we share from our own journeys that maybe somebody listening could, take something away, and it could help them have a brighter day, or laugh a little bit more, or, take themselves a little bit less seriously. And that's my hope, at
Mm,
least.
mm, mm, hmm. Yeah. It's that, I think I don't know where it is, but to me, it's in like the Old Testament or something, where this parable of like, I asked God for wisdom and he gave me problems to solve. And it's like, I asked God for empathy and he gave me tragedy. It's like, it's not really what you're asking for directly, but this is actually how you get it. And I think that's one of the things that I think climbing taught me was, and because it just beats you over the head with it relentlessly, is that it's just, you have to always be in the process. And it used to really annoy me, particularly when I was working more in the professional era of my climbing career, because the journalists only cared about what you just done and what you're going to do next.
Mm-hmm,
And they had
mm-hmm.
no sense of like, where are you now? What are you working on now? What's important to you now? And I didn't know how to articulate that. Hey, this is the questions you should be asking. Like, don't ask me about what my next trip is next summer. Like, the chances of that even happening are like, 1 in 5. And then there's all these other variables. And maybe there's going to be a Maoist revolt and again in Nepal, we're going to have to go somewhere else. But what was interesting is like, what are you going through now? What are you working on now? How are you improving this year? What are you working on? And it's like being an athlete, you're always, there's always something to work on. There's always, and I think that so many of these interesting, how did you put it? This tapestry of life. There's so many, and I feel this way too. I so wish I've said this before on this podcast, but I so wish I had like 100 lifetimes, because there's so many different things I would like to live that I just feel like I don't have enough time to live all of these things. So it's a little frustrating, but
I think, one of the things one of the things that sports gives us, and you and I have talked about Nordic skiing, I just find it fascinating when you get into something so much, and I don't care if it's rock climbing in the way you look at rock, or you feel it, or it's back to Nordic skiing, and like the art of riding a flat ski. It's existential, right? It is like the coolest
yeah.
fucking thing in the world. It is so hard to achieve. But man, when you get in a really good V2 and you're in a race and you are flying and you are on a flat ski that continues to accelerate, I don't know how to describe it. I can't describe it. It's the same thing as surfing a big wave, right? When you're in the sweet spot, and it's just that's what I crave, right? I crave that. And I think it's all throughout all of our lives, and we just have to pay attention enough to the moment to find those little flat skis in our lives, right? How do we get there and glide and continue to accelerate?
Yeah. And, we were talking about this earlier, and I want to bring it back to your work a little bit, because I want to ask a few more questions about that. Is this idea of, how did you put it? Explore and exploit, and being ambidextrous, being able to do both. And one of the things that I think a lot of people in all kinds of professional careers, they go through a period where they explore, and it kind of leads them into a cul-de-sac, right? Like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you get good at doing something, but eventually it sort of is a dead end in some way. And then if you want to stay there, that's fine. Like, you can stay there and you can keep doing that thing at that rate, and you can live your life, and it's pretty predictable. But sometimes people want to like find the next level, and then you have to kind of figure out how to climb out of this cul-de-sac. And that actually requires different people in many times, different team members, different coworkers, a different structure at work.
And this is something that, I've personally been, you know, with Uphill Athlete, we're this extremely flat organization. That's how we want to be. Like all the coaches get paid the same for the same work. There, of course, we have different coaches with different levels of experience and different expertise in certain things, but we come together as a team to help solve problems. And it's like, this is like what we talked about, what we want, what our purpose is as a group of coaches. Right. And that's, but we're also, I'm looking a little bit into the future. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5 years. I don't know. But at some point in the not too distant future, as I see us continuing to grow at the rate if we just continue our current growth and bringing in new athletes, that flat structure isn't going to serve anymore. We're going to need to evolve that. And so I'm starting to have this conversation with people like, how do we do this and maintain our values of being a group of peers and equals? And this is the kind of stuff that you think about. I mean, at Harvard, I may get the terminology wrong, so please correct me, but you have this project called Open Assembly, and you're working on open innovation. And my understanding is that you're fundamentally trying to create opportunities for people with adjacent knowledge to a traditional silo. And you have this beautiful summation where
Yeah, brilliance is abundant and opportunities are scarce.
brilliance is abundant and opportunities are scarce.
Yeah.
And how does this, like when you are thinking of, this is what you're thinking about all day, was what kind of the problem like I as a small business owner am having. And of course at much, much larger, more important organizations than ours, but how do you go about thinking about that as a team of researchers? Like, what does that actually look like? What are you studying?
No, that's a great question. I think one of the things I love about the Harvard work is that everybody's kind of doing their own thing, right? Everybody's kind of thrown into the cauldron and chasing their own creative niche. And those that create momentum get rewarded. They get more research dollars and more, prestigious, in prestigious journals and more cultural momentum and all those things. I think for me, I think we're in the beginning of a revolution AI, and there's a lot of other things we could talk about, the change in culture and those things. But I think if we focus on, what's happening in the workforce and what's happening for large organizations and small organizations like yours, I think we have to start with this idea. And, this is just influenced by my own life, this idea that brilliance is abundant, opportunities are scarce. And I would say that the place that's really been most profound that I've felt is adopting Harry and Charlie from the Far East of Russia, from Vladivostok and Nahutka. And, they're 24 years old. And so I often think, today, like, if we hadn't had the chance to connect, the likelihood of those guys being in an orphanage and, having, you know, not no education, they'd probably be on the front of the war in Ukraine right now. That would be their path. And so they're no smarter than any other kid. They've just have been given some opportunities and they've grabbed it. And I think that's what everybody wants, whether it's, the kid in Kenya who really loves computers and wants to be a software engineer. It's like, why shouldn't he have the same opportunities as you and I do? Like, or the kid that grows up in Chicago and really wants to go climb in the mountains. Like, it's like, how do we open the aperture of opportunities up? That's my long-term, like my goal that I think is the through line for my professional career. I would say that, because of the ability to have these agentic tools, these LLMs, we're on the cusp of really changing our mindset. A lot of the frictions that we've had in organizations have been because we had scarce resources and we had a scarcity mentality of only a few people in the world can do this, or only a few people, there's like scarce knowledge. And all of a sudden, if you have a world where anybody in the world can, use an LLM and be 90% as good as anybody else in the world, how awesome is that? And I think what happens in organizationally, what I'm seeing, what I'm really thinking about is that, we need to think about tools like AI going from point solutions to more re-architecture of organizations. Like, yeah, you could look at AI as a tool and you could say, yeah, it can save me some time on some things. But what's really called into question of like, what is an organization? How do we build organizations? What does that mean? And so the thing that I've really been focused on a micro level is I think that the unit of work at an atomic level is changing. I think we've always thought about it as people, like what builds businesses, people do, and how do we get the right people, and the as you've experienced, like getting the right partners, getting the right people, you know, all that kind of soft work is really, really hard, right? It's really hard to know and assess where people are and how they're doing, and so in my latest work, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of assessment being the new atomic unit of work. And what I mean by that is, if you think historically, it's like the stuff we do in sports, right? It's like you have a training program, you do the training program, and then you assess where you are in, a week, in a month, in a year, whatever that is. What I think what's happening and what we have the ability to do is to change the atomic unit of these kind of new kind of loops between learning and assessment, so that we can actually build real-time assessment into the learning itself. We can see how fast we can adapt and we can grow and we can solve problems, not next week or next month, but the systems I'm most intrigued with in the work that I'm doing are companies that are building the ability for a freelancer, let's call in Lagos, Nigeria, to be the best, AI software engineer in the world, because they have an AI, agentic coach that examines everything they do in their learning journey and in their work journey, and continuously gives them constant feedback saying, like, hey, that was great, that code you just wrote, but here's a way to do it 25% better. And so we build these kind of learning loops so that we're creating velocity for the people that we work with. And I think that applies to every organization, right? I mean, imagine if you had the ability for your coaches to have agentic, coaches that allows them to kind of examine like all the data, all their athletes, all the things that are happening every day in the work, going, hey, that was great. Some of your athletes are succeeding and some didn't today. And here's some suggestions on how to change your coaching approach that might get more to be more successful or attain the goals that they're trying to achieve. I think that's amazing, right? But I think it means that we have to restructure what we do. We have to kind of say, instead of us trying to get tools, we almost have to re-architect our system so that these agents become coordinating layers, right? Coordinating the data, giving us feedback, almost managing our activities so that we provide better outcomes for the people that we work with. So that's the area I'm exploring. I think it's really interesting. I think it applies to every business, right? If you're hiring my God, like in the thing that I've been into the last couple of years is contingent work and freelance, but watching organizations take 4 to 5 months to hire a software engineer, when they can go to an open platform and hire somebody in 2 hours. And just imagine having the trust of knowing that their last keystroke, they're at the 95% level of of being able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. I mean, let's take all the friction out of matching great people with the tasks that need to be done to create accelerated work. I think that's what's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about this on the podcast. I'm not really ready to talk about this officially, but I've been working on something along the lines of what you're talking about for the last year and a half. And so what I'm trying to operationalize, there's a couple layers to it. One is a dashboard for a coach. So one of my coaches will open up their dashboard in the morning and they will see a prioritized list of athlete needs that is we're connected to the Training Peaks through the API. It's coming in. We have an agent that I've spent a lot of money and time and put a lot of IP into training and teaching, and it's doing exactly what you're saying. It's sort of the AI with a human in the loop, and it's really interesting. And then the other layer of that is to build a dashboard on top of that. So I, as a manager, can see how all the coaches are doing, and I'm creating KPIs like, who has all their athletes programmed out for the next 7 days with their workouts, who or doesn't. And I can, and so it's been very effective in our internal trials, even though it's not, the tool isn't working as well as I want it to yet. But it is allowing us to see, like, okay, because there's patterns. Like, I didn't realize that one of our coaches was kind of consistently a little bit behind on his programming. Not a big deal. He always got it done, but it was like, it just needed that little nudge. Now he knows we're watching, and guess what? Like, those athletes are scheduled out all the time. Like, once he, and because it actually is no more effort, and he realized that, and he changed his habits, and now he's doing an incredible job. He was always doing an incredible job, but maybe he was only programming out 3 or 4 days at a time instead of 7 days, which is what I'd like them to have out. And I always tell people, like, tell your athletes it's like a weather forecast. 7 days out, it's like 50-50 that's going to happen. It could completely change. It could be blue skies or a thunderstorm, but you're predicting blue skies for that days. And that's the way coaching is, and that's the truth. So I think that this has been really good, and probably what I'm really interested to talk to you about, and we can talk about it later perhaps too, but is making people comfortable with this.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And we haven't adopted this like let's say a full way, because, as I said, the agentic tools aren't working as well as I'd like. And I also am like, I need more time to bring people along to this new way of working, because they're some of them are like, you have it's like anything. You have the early adopters, you have the people who are kind of in the middle, you have where people are like, no way, I'm never going to do that. And it's been a lot of work on the human side, and I haven't been doing a very good job as a leader in helping people come along to that. And it's scary, right? Like, it's scary for me, it's scary for them. I mean, my pitch is like, hey, we're all going to be more efficient. You're going to be able to work with more clients, do a better job. We're going to be able to prove to our athletes that we have these quality control measures in place. So we know that this high standard that we offer is being met every time across every coach, across every athlete. And these are really powerful arguments. We can make these, and we can deliver a better service. So it's a win-win. But there is this sense, this resistance to, I don't know, it doesn't matter what the details are in a way. I mean, it matters, but it's like, whether it's an environmental issue or they're worried about like a big brother, like they don't, humans are humans. They're feeling their emotions. As you said, they're feeling their feelings. And it's been very interesting for me to like have to slow down and feel that with them. And like sort of take the boogeyman out of that feeling. Well, like, yeah, there's a lot we don't know. And this might be terrible for the environment, or we may solve that problem in a couple of years. I don't really know. Like I don't have all the answers, and I have to be okay with that too. And when I've been talking to other people, I'm sure I'm not alone in this as a small business owner that is working through these things. You're smiling, so you must have seen this.
Yeah, no, I think everybody has the same feelings, right? It's terrifying. It's terrifying to think that, especially in coaching and in things that are very heavy on kind of, cognitive excellence, figuring stuff out. And I mean, I think there's a couple things. One is there's some, at least some tricks that we're kind of, observing in some of our research. We did some research with P&G, and what we noticed is that when you move AI from being a tool to actually a team member, naming it, being a part of it, it's like, hey, Joe's here today. He's going to help us out. Like, just go to Joe, ask the questions. that kind of personification, all of a sudden, like in the research that we've done, is like the more positive emotion for adoption is much, much higher, instead of like, oh, I got to go learn the tools for myself because I'm competing against 10 other people on my team. It's more like, no, Joe's a part of it and it's going to be open. We're just going to, query Joe to kind of ask questions and build models and help us all out. And all that data is going to be on, open and transparent. I think the second point is that, you've got to do it in a way that is not about Big Brother and observing people and, even tying their compensation to it is kind of a terrifying thing. I think the better way to do it is to make sure that it's an opt-in, that it's positive, that they feel like it's an enabler. So, what we're seeing a lot in situations is people I'm involved in one project at a home for, challenged young people. And one of the things that's really difficult is finding caretakers that can, be in the environment and be engaged as caretakers. And so I think what's been really interesting is it starts with a core philosophy. And this organization has decided, instead of saying, well, we're going to use it for punitive, like you've got to do, X amount of engagement or whatever, it's actually bonuses. And there's, and like really almost like 50% bonus at the highest level per hour. And the things are like, hey, if you're not on your phone and you're engaged with a person, we're going to observe the interactions, but this is a way for you to make 50% more. And so not saying, hey, stay off your phone or interact with people and we're going to judge you.
Right. These are the
more
rules.
like,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's more like, hey, this is a way for you to make 50% more money if you do this in a different way, and encourage them to do that. And I think that's a much more positive thing, right? So if you have a bunch of coaches, giving them bonuses to say, hey, those folks that adopt this in a new way, and those athletes that succeed, the alignment of, because at the end of the day, you guys are in the business of helping athletes succeed. And, there should be kind of alignment in philosophy and organizational excellence, and also compensation. And so by using these new tools to give better outcomes to the customer, everybody should share in that success, right? And so it should be a really positive thing. And so anyway, those are some of the examples that we're seeing at Harvard. But I think it starts with compassionate leaders that are just really honest about their own struggles, right? That this is a whole new world of work and it's changing everything. And this is going to be really hard. There's a thing, the famous S curve, right? Of like how organizations grow. But there's also another kind of curve that a lot of folks in academic talk about, is the J curve, that things have to go down before they go up. And that's really happens a lot in really transformative thing. And I think we can see that now in the context of, we would even call it the J curve, a grief curve. It's like going along and being pretty successful and like, holy shit, this could end my career. Oh my God, I'm going to be super depressed. The bots are going to take over. Like, and, and the job of a leader is to be super transparent. Like, not everybody's going to be able to be successful. These are tools that we're all going to have to learn. It's a fucking drag. The beginning of a learning journey is always a drag, because you got a lot more to learn than you have time. And going through that and enabling and just acknowledging the fact that there's grief, right? It doesn't matter to me, to go back to some of the things we talked about, the avalanche and Bridget. It's like what really helped me out were friends that weren't trying to fix things or weren't trying to give me guidance but just would sit with me and go like, this sucks, like we'll get through this together. But it's like, let's just acknowledge that this new world of work is going to be really, really hard, but we've got to all figure it out, because we have clients that are paying us to help them get what they want to go. And if this helps us do that, then that's what counts, right? That's what counts.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, that's the North Star, right? Like helping people. And this is so interesting. So, I see this arc in your career, and tell me if I'm oversimplifying or imposing something that's not there. But I see it in a lot of people, including myself, where we start off our careers and whatever it is where we're sort of very self-focused. And then as we get older and progress, and we end up in places where we're very outward focused. And I mean, you're very outward for all this research that you're doing, all this work you're doing, all these things you talk about every day, all these people you work with at Harvard. It's to help others, right? Like it's to help a software engineer in Lagos, right? Like it's you'll never meet, right? That you'll never know that you touched. And where does that, like, is that, first of all, is that true for you? And second of all, why do we have to start at the beginning there and end there? Why can't we just skip to the end? Like, why, what is that necessary?
I don't know if it's necessary. I think that's a really, really good question. I think that people have much more empathy than I do. I think, when you're young, you're trying to prove yourself, and you're trying to do things that, make your mark and make your name. And, it's almost like you want to be in the club, right? You want to have the plaque on the wall or the awards, or, accomplish something in a race so you can get to the next race and have the next experience and satisfy your sponsors. And I think that, it is a maturation process. I think that I've just been really having some interesting conversations lately, a bit with Peter, Metcalf and some other folks, but what does it mean to be an elder? There's a responsibility to being an elder. And I've really felt this lately, like I felt this deep need to just, to no longer kind of have the burden of having the imposter syndrome and not feeling like I fit in, or I've done stuff. A lot of it comes from, I think, what I've noticed in myself is when I give myself some self-acceptance and some self-forgiveness, damn, that frees up a shit ton of time. It's like all of a sudden I'm not worried about fitting in, or did I do the right thing, or, like all that internal dialogue. It's like, wow, I got some space. I don't have to worry about all that crap anymore. And I can actually take the time to really,
That's beautiful.
sit and listen in the moment. And I think that's a lot. I had this really fascinating conversation that you'll totally laugh at. All the stuff that I've had an opportunity to do, and, the years I spent with Peter, and I went to Peter's 70th birthday. And it was a bit of a wild ride because probably too much information, but I'd just gotten my catheter out from the prostate cancer, but I hopped in the car that day and I drove out, and I wasn't in a great shape. And I showed up at Peter's birthday, and it was just such a great celebration. Peter's such an amazing person. So I wasn't feeling super well. And the thing that struck me is that I think somewhere I forgot that I was a climber. And then yet in this beautiful celebration, there were so many stories that people told that I was somehow involved in the expedition or the business transaction. And it was like, wow, it just like this great self-acceptance is like, I no longer have to worry about, aren't I, am I in the cool kids group? What would that mean? Oh my God, somebody's cooler than me because they did something different. It's like, that's all been kind of washed away. And I think a lot of that is not just age. I think it's just the life experiences that we have, other things that become more important. But I would hope for all of us that we are on a journey, and that we get to the point where we have the opportunity to be an elder and have had enough life experience to say, I don't need to go climb any more big mountains. I'm really respectful, and really in awe of your ability to kind of decide that that's not what you're going to do anymore. Your own very public awareness of that, hey, it's time. And that's a huge thing. We've all seen, friends that can't give it up, that can't let go of that for whatever reason. And it never ends well, right? In a lot of different ways. And so I think that's what really gets me excited these days, is to have these conversations, to share things, is to be insightful. I think what we need right now in culture is just a lot more people being really transparent and really vulnerable. And, just the art of saying, like, I don't know. Like, I've had all these experiences and I don't know where it's going to go, but let's have a conversation and a dialogue about it. And I think that's the world could be a better place if we just kind of put down all our armor and our attitudes and our points of view, whatever it is, right? I mean, you remember back in the day, I just found it so fascinating that, you know, the trad versus the sport climber and all that, like all for naught, right? Look at all that energy that went into stuff that did it really matter in the long run? Nah.
Yeah.
And I think part of the things that comes with age is this ability to kind of let it go and not care so much, right? Not care so much and be able to say, you know, I'm just here and I'm available. And, you know, if there are waves today, I'll go surf.
But not solely age. Age isn't the determinant. I think it's experience. I would argue.
I agree. I conflate the two, right? I conflate the two, the distance of enough experiences to do that.
For our regular listeners, I'll drop a little teaser that the last episode of this season of Voice of the Mountains, I'm going to be in person with Mark Twight, and the theme is being an elder. So
great, that's awesome.
You just mentioned that, and it, you know, he's another individual who, you know, I just see him as such in a lot of ways, I see you this way too, as like an artist, right? Like he's just like such an artistic person. He just feels and sees the world in such interesting ways, and has taught me so much, as have you. This has been an amazing conversation, John. One of the highlights of Voice of the Mountains for me. Last question I want to ask you is, how would you like to be remembered?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I don't know if it's been the cancer or my life's journey, but I have this deep desire in kind of a Hindu tradition is just to have a bowl and be able to disappear and not be known, you know, just become the unknown, you know, I often think a lot. I have the opportunity to be an advisor, and I just really delight in in a role of being just a ghost in the machine. You know, nobody needs to know. You know, nobody needs to know I was there. I just kind of like that, and it creates such freedom, right? It creates ability to kind of have these really curious connections with new people and new things. That if you're not fighting hard to keep your identity and keep your legacy alive, that I just get giddy, and I look forward to continuing that. And it's not that I'm going to disappear in a physical way. I'll still be out there talking about stuff and, you know, engaging in conversations, but it just, I think for my own internal thing, I think it's just getting to a point where you just don't care anymore, like how you're known or what your legacy is. And I'm not quite there yet, for sure. There's a lot of ego still involved in a lot of things that I do, but I long for those days.
And it's so interesting, right? Like you have embodied and lived and you know, I completely associate and relate to this idea of like wanting to sort of bend the arc of the world or the history of mankind, humankind in some way, and to have this sort of equanimity to be like, yeah, I'm just going to disappear, as you put it, be a ghost in the machine. I think that's both of those things can be true, right? I think we've culturally been taught that those are mutually exclusive viewpoints, but that is not the case. And you're not the first one to answer in this way. And I find that pattern very interesting.
And I love the word equanimity, and I think that's a great way to capture it, right? Something that I'm certainly, I don't want to say I'm striving for, because that would be the antithesis of the goal, but something that I am able to embody. Maybe that might be a better way to say it.
Beautiful, John. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your gifts. I mean, you've given, whether people know it or not, you've touched, if they're listening to this, you've almost certainly touched their lives in some way. And
thanks, man.
And you've certainly touched mine in a lot of positive ways. So thank you for that. And thank you for all you've done. Thank you for being
Steve.
here today.
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you, John. One of the most common questions I get is, how should I get started with training? Well, they say the first step is the hardest, so let's make that easy. We are offering free 4-week samples of our most popular training plans for mountaineering, trail running, climbing, and more. Go to uphillathlete.com/letsgo to sign up for our newsletter, and you will not only get monthly insights on training for uphill athletes, but you'll also get a sample training plan. It's totally free, so why wait? That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO.